Richard Caldwell lowered his gaze to the check in his hand as if inspecting a stain. "This amount isn't valid," he said flatly, sliding the paper back across the counter. His eyes flicked over Ariana's worn hoodie, quiet judgment, sharp as glass. Ariana stood still and drew a breath. "It's my tuition payment," she said, voice steady despite the tremor underneath. She knew she was right, and she knew that look too well, the one that questioned her right to belong before she even spoke. Caldwell's mouth curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. Without another word, he lifted the check and tore it clean in half. The sound cut through the marble hall crisp, final, almost ceremonial. Heads turned. A few curious glances, a snicker, a whisper. The air filled with judgment disguised as curiosity, floating around her like dust in the fluorescent light. Ariana didn't move. Her hands tightened around her backpack straps. The anger surged, but she swallowed it whole, still silent like the ground before it splits open. Outside, the October wind rattled the glass walls. No one in that bank yet knew that the tear of that check had just begun an earthquake, one that would swallow the entire institution whole. Ariana stepped forward when her number was called, approaching the teller's window with the check held carefully between her fingers. The woman behind the glass was in her late 40s, blonde hair pulled back tight, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Good morning," Ariana said politely. "I'd like to deposit this check, please." The teller took the check without looking up. Then her eyes landed on the amount. Her gaze traveled slowly from the check to Ariana's face, down to her worn hoodie, then back to the check. $54,000, she said, voice pitched loud enough that nearby customers glanced over. "That's quite a large amount." Ariana kept her voice level. "Yes, ma'am. It's for my Harvard tuition deposit. My mother wrote the check." "Harvard." The woman's eyebrows rose in a way that wasn't congratulations. "And you're sure this check is legitimate?" At the next window, an elderly white man was depositing a similarly large check with swift efficiency. No questions, no loud announcements, just smooth, respectful service, Ariana noticed. She always noticed. "Yes, ma'am. It's from my mother's account. Monica Bennett." The teller frowned at the signature, then at Ariana again. "I'm going to need to call the manager. Please step aside." Ariana moved to the side, standing in that terrible space between being helped and being dismissed. She watched other customers come and go, their transactions completed while she waited. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "How did it go, baby?" Ariana's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she pocketed the phone. She didn't want to worry Monica, not yet. A man emerged from the back office. Tall, early 50s, graying hair, expensive navy suit. His stride was purposeful, almost aggressive, and when his eyes landed on Ariana, they were already cold with judgment. Richard Caldwell had been branch manager of Summit Trust for 15 years. He had cultivated an environment where certain people were welcomed and certain people were questioned, where certain names opened doors and certain faces closed them. He approached holding the check like evidence. "You're the one trying to deposit this?" Not hello, not how can I help you? Just accusation wrapped in a question. "Yes, sir," Ariana said, chin lifted slightly. "That's my Harvard tuition deposit. My mother wrote that check." Richard examined the check with exaggerated scrutiny, turning it over, holding it to the light, running his thumb across the signature. "Your mother. And what does your mother do?" "She's a CEO." Ariana kept her answer short. "A CEO." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Of what company?" "Tech Vision Capital." He didn't recognize the name or didn't show it. "And where do you live?" The question had nothing to do with the check. They both knew it. "Why does that matter?" Ariana asked quietly. "I'm trying to verify the legitimacy of this check, young lady. Where do you live?" Around them, the bank continued its rhythm. Customers came and went. Ariana stood in the center, feeling every eye that turned her way. "Lincoln Park," she finally answered. Richard's eyebrows rose. Lincoln Park, one of Chicago's wealthiest neighborhoods. The disbelief on his face was naked now. Lincoln Park. And you expect me to believe your mother just wrote you a check for $54,000? It's not about what you believe, Ariana said, an edge in her voice now. It's about what's true. You can call her to verify. Oh, I intend to verify. But first, I need additional identification. Driver's license, passport, school ID. Ariana handed over her license. Richard studied it with exaggerated care, then handed it back. "Wait here," he said, and disappeared into his office with her check. 20 minutes passed. Ariana remained standing near the teller windows, her backpack growing heavier on her shoulders. Other customers glanced at her as they passed, some with curiosity, others with pity that made her feel more exposed. Through the glass walls of Richard's office, she could see him on the phone, gesturing while holding her check. He wasn't calling her mother. The way he kept glancing out at her with suspicion, this wasn't verification. This was something else. Finally, Richard emerged and approached with deliberate slowness. "I've been on the phone with our fraud prevention department," he announced, loud enough that customers turned to look. "They have concerns about this check." Ariana felt heat rise in her chest. "What concerns?" "The amount is unusually large for someone your age. The signature doesn't match our records exactly. And frankly, we see a lot of attempted fraud. You'd be surprised how creative people get." "I'm not trying to defraud anyone," Ariana said, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "That check is legitimate. If you'd just call my mother—" "I don't need to call anyone," Richard interrupted. "What I need is for you to explain where you really got this check." The implication hung in the air like poison. Around them, the bank continued its normal rhythm. An older white woman at the counter was depositing an even larger check, and the teller was smiling at her, asking about her grandchildren. No interrogation, no accusations. Just smooth, respectful service. Ariana pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my mother right now." "Put the phone away," Richard said sharply. "You're disrupting other customers." "I'm disrupting?" Ariana looked at the people now openly staring. "You're the one making a scene. All I did was try to deposit a check." "Do you have other documentation? Bank statements from your mother's account? Tax returns? Proof of enrollment at Harvard?" The questions came rapid fire, each designed to undermine, to suggest guilt. Ariana thought about the white students at her prep school who talked casually about their parents writing checks for boats and vacation homes. She tried to imagine any of them being interrogated like this. She couldn't, because it would never happen to them. "I have my acceptance letter from Harvard," Ariana said quietly, "but I shouldn't have to prove this. This is my mother's check, from her account, made out to me. You're treating me like I stole it." "I'm treating you like someone who walked into my bank with a very large check and a story that doesn't add up," Richard said. "If you can't provide additional documentation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave while we complete our investigation." "Investigation? Of what? Of me trying to deposit money that belongs to my family?" She saw it then in Richard's eyes, something ugly and old, a prejudice so deeply rooted he probably didn't recognize it as prejudice anymore. To him, this was just procedure, just being thorough, just protecting the bank from people like her. Ariana showed him the Harvard acceptance letter on her phone. Richard barely glanced at it. This could be fabricated. People Photoshop these things all the time. Something in Ariana's chest went cold and hard. She opened her text thread with her mother. "Mom," she typed, "they won't accept the check. The manager says it might be fraudulent. He won't even call you to verify." The response came within seconds. "What's his name?" "Richard Caldwell, branch manager." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Okay, baby. Don't worry. I'm handling this. Just stay calm and don't let them make you feel small. Ariana looked up at Richard, who was still holding her check with that expression of smug certainty. My mother is handling this, she said quietly. Richard's smile was condescending. I'm sure she is. In the meantime, I need you to wait outside while we complete our investigation. I'm not going anywhere, Ariana said. Not until you process my check or give me a legitimate reason why you can't. The standoff lasted another 10 minutes. Ariana refused to leave. Richard refused to process the check. Other customers began to notice the tension, the way the young black girl stood her ground while the white manager loomed over her. Some looked away, uncomfortable. Others watched with open curiosity. Richard finally stepped closer, lowering his voice to a tone somehow more threatening for its quietness. Listen carefully. I have been more than patient. But this check is not getting processed today. Not without proper verification, which will take at least 72 hours. So you can either leave voluntarily, or I will have security escort you out. I'm not leaving without my check, Ariana said steadily. Your check? Richard's voice rose, the mask of professional courtesy slipping. This isn't your check. This is a piece of paper you brought into my bank with a wild story about Harvard and a CEO mother. He turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers, as if appealing for validation. We have procedures in place for a reason, to protect honest, hardworking customers from people who think they can walk in here and— And what? Ariana interrupted, her voice cutting through his performance. Say it. People like me who think we can what? Richard's face flushed. People who think they can commit fraud. That's not what you were going to say. Ariana's eyes were steady on his face, and in that moment she looked older than 16, looked like her mother facing down a boardroom of men who had underestimated her. You were going to say something else, something about people like me. The bank had gone quiet. Even the tellers had stopped working to watch. Richard seemed to realize he had an audience, and something ugly crystallized in his expression. He had gone too far to back down now. You know what? Richard said, holding up the check. I've had enough of this. And then, before Ariana could react, before anyone could stop him, he tore the check in half. The sound of ripping paper cut through the silence like a gunshot. He tore it again and again, until Ariana's $54,000 Harvard tuition deposit was nothing but confetti in his hands. Get out of my bank, Richard said, his voice thick with contempt. You come in here with your fake checks and your attitude, thinking you're going to pull something over on us. Well, not here, not in my branch. Girls like you need to learn that there are consequences for trying to game the system. He let the pieces flutter down onto the counter between them. Harvard? You should focus on finishing high school before you start dreaming about Ivy League schools. Now get out before I call the police and have you arrested for attempted fraud. The words hit Ariana like physical blows. Around them, the silence was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. The customers stood frozen, some with shock, others with voyeuristic fascination, watching this young girl being publicly humiliated. Ariana looked down at the shredded pieces of her mother's check scattered across the counter. Her hands were shaking, her whole body trembling with rage and humiliation so profound she could barely breathe. But she would not cry. She would not give Richard Caldwell that satisfaction. She began picking up the pieces, one by one, her movements slow and deliberate. Each fragment went into her pocket, evidence of what had been done to her. Her throat was tight, her eyes burning, but she kept her face composed. I will remember this, Ariana said quietly, her voice steady despite everything. Every word you said, everything you did. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Remember whatever you want. Just get out before I have you removed by force. Ariana straightened, meeting his eyes one last time. In that moment, Richard Caldwell saw something in her expression that should have warned him. Something that said she was not defeated, not broken, but he was too pleased with himself to recognize what he was looking at. Ariana turned and walked toward the exit, every eye following her. The automatic doors slid open, and she stepped out into the Chicago morning. Behind her, she heard the bank resume its normal sounds, the mundane business of money moving through systems built to exclude people like her. Her hands were still shaking as she pulled out her phone and called her mother. When Monica answered, Ariana's voice finally cracked. "Mom, he tore up the check, in front of everyone. He called me a scammer and said I should focus on finishing high school instead of dreaming about Harvard. He said girls like me are trying to game the system." There was a long silence. When Monica spoke, her voice was quiet and controlled, but Ariana could hear the steel underneath. "Tell me everything, baby. Every single word he said. Every person who was there." Standing on the sidewalk with pieces of her destroyed check in her pocket, Ariana recounted every moment of her humiliation. And as she spoke, she didn't know that her mother was already making calls, already setting in motion a response that would shake the foundation of that bank. What Richard Caldwell had failed to understand was that he hadn't just torn up a check. He had torn up the dignity of a young woman whose mother had spent 30 years building an empire, specifically so her daughter would never have to experience what Monica herself had endured. "Listen to me, Ariana," Monica said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me? Nothing. What happened is not about you. It's about a system that's been broken for a long time, and people like Richard Caldwell who think they can keep it broken. But they don't know who they're dealing with." Ariana wiped her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Those procedures they claim to follow? The ones that somehow only apply to certain people? We're about to find out if they really believe in them." Monica Bennett hung up the phone with her daughter and sat in silence for exactly 30 seconds. Then she made her first call. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the week," Monica told her assistant, her voice calm but carrying an edge that brooked no argument. "Get me every piece of documentation we have on Summit Trust Bank. Shareholding percentage, board members, all communications from the past 5 years. I want it in an hour." She called her lawyer next. "Pull together a team. Corporate law, civil rights, financial discrimination. We're going after a bank." Then her communications director. "Document everything quietly. Other complaints about discriminatory practices at Summit Trust Chicago branches, social media, consumer databases, everything. Keep it confidential." Monica didn't go to the bank that day. She didn't storm in demanding justice. That wasn't how she operated. Real power wasn't about dramatic gestures. It was about preparation, strategy, knowing exactly where to apply pressure for maximum effect. She spent the afternoon building her case with methodical precision. By evening, she had a clear picture. Summit Trust Bank, where she owned 34% of shares, the largest single shareholder. Richard Caldwell, branch manager 15 years, personnel file conspicuously clean despite whispers of problems. And a pattern emerging, multiple complaints from customers of color, all dismissed as misunderstandings or procedural issues. Richard Caldwell went home that evening feeling entirely satisfied. He told his wife about the girl who tried to deposit a fake check, how he'd handled it decisively, how you had to be firm with people trying to take advantage. He slept well that night, secure in his righteousness. He had no idea that across the city, Monica Bennett was building a case that would dismantle everything he'd built. The next morning, Monica sent an email, brief, professional, signed M. Bennett, priority customer. It requested an explanation for the unusual handling involving her daughter and asked for formal review. She didn't mention Tech Vision, didn't mention her shareholding. She wanted to see how he'd respond when he thought she was just another parent with a complaint. Richard read the email over his morning coffee and laughed. He forwarded it to Marcus Webb, the regional operations manager who'd worked alongside him for a decade. Marcus was cut from the same cloth, mid-50s, white, risen through Summit Trust by maintaining the status quo and never asking uncomfortable questions. "Look at this," Richard typed. "The mother is trying to make a federal case. Some people never learn." Marcus replied within minutes. "Want me to handle it? We can shut this down fast." "No, I'll take care of it. Time to teach these people a lesson about wasting our time." His response to Monica was curt, dismissive. "Dear Ms. Bennett, your daughter's check was processed according to standard verification procedures. Our fraud prevention protocols protect all customers. No further action is required. Regards, Richard Caldwell, Branch Manager." Monica read it twice, expression never changing. Then she saved it, added it to her growing file. Every word, every dismissal, every piece of evidence that this wasn't isolated but a pattern. That afternoon, Marcus Webb arrived at the Chicago branch. He found Richard in his office and closed the door. "Got your back on this Bennett situation," Marcus said, settling into a chair. "If the mother pushes it, we'll say the girl couldn't provide adequate documentation. Standard procedure by the book." "Exactly," Richard agreed. "These people think they can intimidate us with complaints, but we have policies for a reason. The check looked suspicious. The girl had no credible proof. We did everything right." "Damn right," Marcus said, leaning back with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. 30 years in this business. You learned to spot the scammers. Pattern recognition." Neither noticed how these people had slipped so naturally into their conversation. Neither recognized their own bias reflected in each other's words. They'd insulated themselves so thoroughly in their assumptions, they genuinely believed they were simply doing their jobs well. What they didn't know was that one of the tellers had witnessed everything. She'd watched Richard tear that check, heard his words, seen the customers' faces. She'd gone home feeling sick, remembering all the similar incidents she'd seen before. She'd spent hours debating. She needed this job. Student loans, rent, responsibilities. Speaking up could cost everything. But she thought about that girl, 16, trying to deposit money for Harvard, and how Richard had destroyed her in front of everyone. So she did something brave. She accessed the security footage she had clearance to view, and made a copy. Then she found Ariana's story on social media. By now, Ariana had posted about what happened, not naming the bank initially. "Tried to deposit my Harvard tuition check today. Manager tore it up and called me a scammer. I'm 16. I'm tired of having to prove I deserve to exist in spaces built for everyone." The post went viral overnight. Thousands of comments, shares, people adding their own stories of discrimination everywhere. Justice for Ariana trended across Twitter and TikTok. The anger built like a wave. The teller reached out through direct message. "I work at the bank where this happened. I have video. I think people should see what really went down." Ariana showed Monica. Monica understood the risk this woman was taking. She had the identity verified through her lawyer, then reached out carefully, offering legal protection. "If you share that video, there will be repercussions, but I can protect you and offer you a position at my company if necessary. I want you to know what you're walking into." The response was simple. "I've been watching this happen for 2 years. Different customers, same pattern. I'm tired of being complicit by staying silent." The video went online the next day through a journalist investigating discriminatory practices at Chicago banks. The footage was damning. Everything. Richard's dismissive treatment of Ariana from the start, how he questioned her repeatedly while white customers were processed smoothly. The moment he tore the check, pieces fluttering down. His words, "Girls like you need to learn there are consequences." Ariana's dignity as she picked up each piece with trembling hands. Other customers' faces, some shocked, some indifferent, none intervening. Within hours, millions of views. Within a day, national news. CNN, MSNBC, local Chicago stations camped outside Summit Trust. Civil rights organizations issued statements. The NAACP called for formal investigation. Social media exploded with anger and calls for accountability. Richard's phone started ringing before dawn. First Patricia Lowe, his regional director, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "What the hell did you do, Richard? I have reporters calling, board members asking questions, legal losing their minds. Tell me that video is fake." "Patricia, listen. I don't want to hear it, not yet. I'm coming down there tomorrow, and you better have a damn good explanation." She hung up. Richard tried calling Marcus, but Marcus didn't answer. Suddenly, everyone was too busy, too occupied. The walls were closing in. By evening, Summit Trust corporate headquarters was in full crisis mode, CEO being briefed, legal preparing statements, PR fielding hundreds of calls, board scheduling emergency meeting. Monica received a call from Summit Trust's board chairman. "Ms. Bennett, I understand your daughter was the young woman in that video. On behalf of the organization, I want to apologize. We're taking immediate action." "I appreciate the call," Monica said coolly. "And I assume you're aware I'm your largest shareholder?" Pause. Yes, we have that information." "Good. Then you'll understand when I say I'm not interested in private apology or quiet settlement. What happened to my daughter happens to people every day in your branches. I have documentation of 12 similar cases in Chicago alone over 3 years. This isn't about one branch manager. This is institutional failure. As a major shareholder, I intend to ensure this institution either fixes itself or faces consequences." The silence was profound. The chairman had expected a complaint, perhaps a lawsuit, maybe bad press. He hadn't expected Monica Bennett armed with data, strategy, and leverage of 34% ownership. "We'll convene an emergency board meeting," he finally said. "I'd like you to attend. As a major shareholder, you have every right." "I'll be there," Monica said, "with my legal team." After hanging up, Monica sat with Ariana in their Lincoln Park home, city lights spreading below. Outside, the story continued growing. News vans parked down the street, reporters calling, social media on fire with support for Ariana and fury at the bank. "This is going to get bigger before it's over," Monica said gently. "Are you ready?" Ariana thought about the video, millions watching her worst moment, about Richard's face when he tore her check, about all the other people treated as if their money, their dignity, their very presence was somehow suspicious. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's make sure this never happens to anyone else." 1 week after the video went viral, Summit Trust Bank announced an emergency press conference. By 1:30, the conference room was packed with journalists, civil rights activists, and community leaders. In the front row sat Ariana Bennett, hands folded quietly in her lap. Richard Caldwell and Patricia Lowe were required to attend. Richard sat at the table on stage, his face pale, suit looking less crisp than usual. Patricia gripped her chair's arms with white-knuckled tension. Marcus Webb had conveniently called in sick. The room buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew this was more than a standard corporate apology. The video had been too damning, the outcry too loud. Patricia stood to speak, approaching the microphone carefully. "Thank you all for coming. Summit Trust takes these allegations seriously. We have reviewed the security footage and interviewed personnel. We acknowledge that the incident involving Miss Bennett was handled inappropriately, and we are taking steps to ensure—" The door at the back opened. Every head turned. Conversation died instantly. Monica Bennett walked in wearing a black suit, her bearing radiating authority earned from years of building empires and breaking barriers. Behind her walked her legal team carrying thick portfolios. Patricia faltered mid-sentence. She glanced at the board chairman in the front row, saw his ashen face, and understood the narrative had just been taken from her hands. Monica walked down the center aisle with unhurried confidence, past journalists frantically typing, past activists sensing something significant about to happen. She reached Ariana and placed one hand on her daughter's shoulder, solidarity and protection captured by a dozen cameras. Then she continued to the stage. Patricia stepped back reflexively. Monica took the podium, adjusted the microphone, and surveyed the room with calm assurance. "Good afternoon," Monica said, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Monica Bennett. I am the CEO of TechVision Capital, and I am also the largest single shareholder of Summit Trust Bank, holding 34% of the company's shares." The silence was absolute. This was no longer about customer service failure. This had become something else entirely. Richard's face went from pale to gray. The woman he'd dismissed as just another complaining parent was the largest shareholder of his institution, the person with more power over his future than anyone in this room. Monica's eyes found Richard's, held his gaze. The young woman Mr. Caldwell tore a check from, the 16-year-old he publicly humiliated and accused of fraud, that was my daughter, Ariana. The check he destroyed was signed by me from my account for her Harvard tuition. She paused, letting the weight settle. But I'm not here to talk about personal grievances. I'm here because what happened to my daughter is not isolated. It's systemic. Her legal team distributed thick folders to journalists. Over the past week, my team compiled documentation of discriminatory practices at Summit Trust branches across Chicago. 12 separate incidents over 3 years. 12 customers, all people of color, subjected to excessive scrutiny, denied services, or treated with suspicion for transactions that would have been processed without question for white customers. The room erupted. Questions shouted, cameras flashing, corporate control completely shattered. Patricia looked like she wanted to disappear. The board chairman was on his phone, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. Monica raised one hand. Remarkably, the room quieted. That was power, not from title or position, but from absolute certainty in your authority and the legitimacy of your cause. "I'm not here for revenge," Monica continued. "I'm here to ensure accountability and change. As a major shareholder, I have fiduciary responsibility to this institution. Right now, Summit Trust is failing its customers, its communities, and the values it claims to represent." She turned to Richard directly. "Mr. Caldwell, you didn't just tear up a check. You tore up my daughter's dignity. You exposed a pattern of discrimination allowed to persist because people in authority chose to look away." Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came. What defense could he offer? The video was everywhere, the evidence documented, his dismissive email now part of legal filing. Monica addressed the room again. "Effective immediately, I'm calling for an emergency board meeting. I will present comprehensive reform plans, mandatory anti-discrimination training, independent audits, oversight committees, and leadership changes at branches with documented discriminatory patterns." She paused, delivering her next words with quiet finality. "The board has agreed to these terms, and Mr. Richard Caldwell has been terminated, effective today. Additionally, he will face civil charges for violation of fair lending laws and civil rights statutes." The room exploded. Richard stood abruptly, but security guards were already moving toward the stage. The board had made their decision before the conference started. Patricia spoke urgently into her phone. Corporate machinery in full motion. Damage control, legal scrambling, PR drafting statements. But Monica looked past the chaos to where Ariana sat in the front row. Her daughter was crying, not from shame or pain, but relief and vindication, finally seeing justice done. Monica stepped away from the microphone as security escorted Richard out. She walked down the steps directly to Ariana, pulling her into an embrace while cameras flashed and questions echoed around them. "It's over, baby," Monica whispered. "It's over, and we won." Within 48 hours of the press conference, Richard Caldwell's life as he knew it was over. The termination was immediate and public. Summit Trust's statement left no ambiguity. Richard Caldwell has been terminated for violations of company policy, discriminatory practices, and conduct unbecoming of our institutional values. We apologize unreservedly to Miss Ariana Bennett and all customers who experienced similar treatment. But the bank's action was only the beginning. Monica's legal team filed a civil lawsuit within 24 hours, documenting a pattern that implicated institutional failure to supervise and correct discriminatory behavior. The lawsuit named 8 other customers who had experienced similar treatment, people too afraid or discouraged to come forward until now. Each story was damning. A black business owner questioned extensively about legitimate deposits. A Latino family denied a loan despite meeting all criteria. An Asian American woman asked repeatedly to prove identity for simple withdrawals from her own account. The pattern was undeniable. Richard hired a lawyer, tried mounting a defense, but there was none that could stand against video evidence and documented history. His lawyer advised settlement, apology, damage control. But Richard's pride wouldn't let him. He insisted he'd followed procedure, protected the bank, done nothing wrong. The civil court disagreed. After a 3-day hearing where the video played repeatedly, where former customers testified, where even some colleagues admitted witnessing concerning behavior, the judge ruled decisively. $500,000 in compensatory and punitive damages split among plaintiffs. Richard's pension frozen pending appeal. His banking license suspended indefinitely. But financial penalty was only part of his collapse. News outlets published his name, face, the video. The story became national, a symbol of institutional discrimination. His wife filed for separation. His adult children stopped returning calls. Friends who'd supported him initially grew quiet as evidence mounted. Marcus Webb faced his own reckoning. His email exchanges with Richard were subpoenaed, his pattern of enabling discriminatory practices exposed. He was demoted, transferred to a position with no customer contact, his career trajectory permanently damaged. Patricia Lowe found herself under intense scrutiny. The board determined that while she hadn't engaged in discrimination herself, she'd failed supervisory responsibilities by not addressing complaint patterns. She was removed from her regional position and transferred to administrative risk management, a professional exile. Summit Trust itself faced consequences beyond the lawsuit. Federal regulators opened investigations. The FDIC announced comprehensive audits of all Chicago branches. Stock prices dropped 6%. And Monica, as largest shareholder, secured seats on 2 key committees, operational oversight and diversity and inclusion. Changes came swiftly. Every employee underwent mandatory training on implicit bias and fair lending. New protocols established for handling complaints, with direct reporting to corporate compliance bypassing branch management. An independent ombudsman appointed to review discrimination complaints. Customer demographics data tracked to identify disparate treatment patterns. The bank issued formal apologies, written letters, CEO phone calls, and settlements with financial compensation and policy commitments to Ariana and each customer who'd come forward. 6 months later, Richard worked security at a suburban mall, his banking career over, reputation destroyed, family fractured. Every day reminded him of what he'd lost through his own choices. Meanwhile, Ariana received a letter from Summit Trust's new CEO. The bank was establishing the Monica Bennett Scholarship for Academic Excellence and Social Justice, providing full tuition support for 5 students of color annually to attend college of their choice. The check for her Harvard tuition, a new one, properly processed, had cleared weeks ago. But this scholarship meant her humiliation, her pain, her courage would create opportunities for others. Something good had grown from something terrible. Justice, Monica had told her daughter, isn't just about punishment. It's about making sure harm done leads to healing that matters, changes that last, futures better than the past. Richard Caldwell had fallen. But more importantly, the system that enabled him, protected him, and allowed his prejudice to flourish had been forced to change. And that was a victory that mattered far more than any individual punishment could achieve. 3 months later, Ariana stood before hundreds of Harvard freshmen during orientation week, invited to share her story as part of programming on social justice. The September air was crisp with possibility. I was 16 when a bank manager tore up my college tuition check and called me a scammer in front of a room full of people, she began, voice steady. He looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong, and for about 20 minutes I believed I was powerless. She paused, looking at the faces watching her, students from every background, all who had fought their own battles to be here. But I learned something that day. Dignity isn't something someone can give you or take away. It's something you carry inside yourself. When that manager tore up my check, he thought he was putting me in my place. What he actually did was show me exactly who I am. Someone who won't accept being treated as less than, someone who knows her worth isn't determined by other people's prejudices. She talked about her mother then, about watching Monica transform pain into purpose, using power not for revenge, but for systematic change. My mom taught me that real justice isn't about making one person pay. It's about making sure what happened to you doesn't happen to the next person. It's about changing systems, not just punishing individuals. The scholarship fund bearing her name had already awarded its first recipients, 5 students from underserved communities heading to college with full tuition support. That, she told the assembly, was what justice looked like. Not Richard Caldwell losing his job, but 5 other kids getting opportunities they might not have had. What happened to me hurt. It still hurts sometimes, Ariana said softly. But I'm here at Harvard not because I proved that manager wrong. I don't need his validation. I proved something to myself. I proved I could pick up those torn pieces, walk out with my head high, and keep moving forward. She finished with her mother's words. The world will try to tell you who you are, what you're worth, where you belong. Your job isn't to argue with those voices. Your job is to know yourself so well that those voices become irrelevant. Build the life you deserve, then help others build theirs too. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Afterward, dozens of students shared their own stories of being underestimated, told they didn't belong. Ariana listened to each one, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Not a burden, but a purpose. Back in Chicago, Monica watched the video of Ariana's speech online. She sat in her office at Tech Vision Capital, the city spreading below, and allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Her daughter was going to be extraordinary. Her phone buzzed with another report from the independent auditor examining Summit Trust's practices. Progress was being made. Measurable, documented progress in how customers were treated, complaints handled, discrimination prevented. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And better mattered. Monica thought about what Ariana said about dignity, about knowing your worth, regardless of others' prejudices. She had spent 30 years proving herself in rooms that didn't want her, at tables where she wasn't welcome. She had succeeded not by accepting their definitions of who she could be, but by defining herself and refusing to accept anything less. That was what she had given her daughter. Not just money for tuition, not just a powerful last name, but the unshakable knowledge that she had value, that her dreams were valid, that her presence in any space was not to be questioned but celebrated. Justice had been served. But more importantly, a lesson had been taught by Ariana, by everyone who watched that video and saw themselves in her story. The lesson that dignity is claimed, not granted, that justice is demanded, not begged for, that change is built by people who refuse to accept the world as it is and insist on making it what it should be. Ariana's story didn't end at Harvard. It became a catalyst. Within 6 months, 3 other major banks announced comprehensive reviews of customer service practices after whistleblowers came forward with similar stories. The Department of Justice opened investigations into discriminatory lending patterns nationwide. State legislatures introduced bills requiring mandatory bias training for banking employees. One 16-year-old's refusal to accept humiliation had rippled further than anyone anticipated. Justice for Ariana evolved into, dignity in banking, then know your worth, then a broader movement demanding respect in all spaces. People shared stories, created support networks, turned one conversation into a national reckoning. Monica used her platform deliberately, challenging executives and shareholders to ask hard questions. Who are we serving? Who are we excluding? What patterns are we allowing because addressing them would be uncomfortable? The Monica Bennett Scholarship grew from 5 students to 50, then more. Each recipient committed not just to excel academically, but to pay it forward, mentoring, advocating, using their education to dismantle the systems that tried to keep them out. Richard Caldwell became a cautionary tale, his name forever linked to consequences of unchecked prejudice. Business schools used the case in ethics courses. Diversity programs showed the video as an example of institutional bias in practice. But this story isn't about Richard Caldwell. It's about every person who has stood where Ariana stood, doubted, dismissed, treated as if their presence required extraordinary justification. It's about parents like Monica who built empires so their children wouldn't fight the same battles. It's about choosing between accepting the world as it is or insisting it become what it should be. If you've ever been made to feel like you don't belong, like your dreams are too big, like your presence isn't as valid, remember Ariana picking up those torn pieces. Remember her dignity. Remember she won by refusing to let someone else's judgment define her worth. If you have power in your workplace, community, family, remember Monica. Power unused to protect others is power wasted. The systems you benefit from might be crushing someone else. You have a choice about whether to maintain those systems or dismantle them. Share this story if you believe dignity is a right, not a privilege. Tag someone who inspired you to stand up for yourself. Comment with your own story of overcoming discrimination. Build a community of people who refuse to be made small, who take up the space they deserve, who understand justice isn't a gift, but a demand. The world has changed since that October morning. Not completely, not perfectly, but measurably, in ways that matter. Because one girl refused to accept humiliation, one mother refused to let injustice stand, and thousands who heard their story decided they wouldn't accept it anymore either. Your turn. What space have you been told you don't belong in? What dream have you been told is too big? What dignity have you been asked to surrender? Don't accept it. Don't adjust yourself to fit into boxes built to exclude you. Stand tall. Speak up. Demand better. And when you win, reach back and pull someone else forward. Dignity is not given. It's claimed. Justice is not begged for. It's demanded. Change doesn't happen when we accept the world as it is. It happens when we insist on making it what it should be. Now go. Take up your space. Know your worth. Change your world.